Thanks to Harrison Lindenfield, who graciously provided me with a rough translation of this document, then worked with me on the editing thereof, and allowed me to publish it, I am pleased to present the world's first English translation of The Secret Statutes of the Templars, discovered by Theodor Merzdorf in a Masonic library, having been copied from a document found in the Vatican Archives, and then translated by him into German and published in 1877, shortly after Merzdorf's sudden and early demise at age 29. The authenticity of these statutes has been a matter of controversy for almost 150 years, but due to the language barrier, few in the English-speaking world are familiar with them. My own investigation into the matter of the Templars, detailed in my book Baphomet, the Temple Mystery Unveiled, co-written with Alexander Rivera, indicates that these statutes may very well be authentic, for the practices detailed therein, spitting on the cross, exposure of the male member during initiation, the repetition of Islamic prayers, and fraternizing with the Saracen enemy, along with Druzes, Cathars, Bogomils, and other heretics, as well as the worship of the idol Baphomet, are all consistent with the continuum of tradition that connects the Templars with their Gnostic predecessors and their Freemasonic descendants, according to our research. The content here is also consistent with the revelations contained in the Chinon parchment, detailing the confessions that Templars made to Pope Clement V, which were discovered in the Vatican Archives in 2007 and released by Vatican spokeswoman Barbara Fraile in 2011. Part of what connects all the seemingly disparate sects within the continuum of tradition previously mentioned is a belief that those who have received the, quote, baptism of wisdom, called here the baptism of fire, are literally above the law, not just man's law, but the law of Moses, so that nothing they choose to do may be counted against them. We find this attitude in sects as far-flung as the Ismailis of the Middle Ages and modern Aleister Crowley-following Thelemites. It is most likely what was meant when it was said that the Cathars, a.k.a. the Albigensians, could, quote, no longer sin after they went through the sacred consolamentum rite, or the, quote, rite of perfection, alleged in these documents to have been practiced by the Knights Templar as well. Here now is an audio discussion recorded recently between me, Tracy Twyman, Harrison Lindenfield, the translator, and Alexander Rivera, my co-author for the book Baphomet, the Temple Mystery Unveiled. The conversation is about Mr. Lindenfield's translation of the Secret Statutes and related matters. To read the Secret Statutes of the Templars, please go to tracytwyman.com/plus ultra. Is Merzdorf calling it the Book of the Baptism of Fire, the Secret Statutes of the Templars? Is that a apt translation of the title of this document?
I guess, except for, like, in the Latin, the phrase baptism of fire never appears.
Okay. So
which is fine. It's fine. It's consolamentum, which means the same thing. I'm not sure where baptism of fire as a term came from. It might be from Hammer Perkstall. I don't know who first started saying that.
Oh, I know that that's something we tried to figure out at one point, Alex, didn't we? Try to figure out the origin of this term, baptism of fire, and when it became associated with Templars.
Yeah, I remember that.
I remember didn't you find some stuff in, like some Gnostic stuff going down back to Simon that referred to it?
Yeah. It was both a baptism of fire and water, yeah. It was a Simonian sect, actually, that did that. And I think it comes from it's like a pseudo-Orthodox writing. I think it might be Ambrose. I'm not sure. I'll have to double-check here. But I know we talked about it in the book for sure. But yeah, it does originate with Simon, maybe.
Well, go ahead, please.
I was just saying, it seems just to be a little bit of an editorialization on the German apologists' part. Or the Orientals. That they're calling it baptism of fire when it's not actually called that in the statutes. Yeah.
So it's like at some point someone decided that the rite that is known to be secret, but no one officially ever said what it was, that the Templars were doing secretly, and also I know that term was applied to the secret rites of the Cathars, I believe. Mm-hmm. So someone decided that that's called the baptism of fire at some point, and we haven't really figured that out.
No.
Okay.
don't know. And consolamentum has its own implications. So I believe it's from the Greek parakleta, which describes Jesus describes the Holy Spirit as consoler, or I can't remember all the ways it's translated into English.
The paraclete,
yeah. Yeah. So it's sort of like the idea of being grasped with the Holy Spirit, which is reflected in some other of their like theology and statutes and stuff like that.
Okay, and so another thing I think is noteworthy is that Muhammad, some people think that the reference to the consoler or the paraclete that's going to come after Jesus, well, the word I know in I think the Aramaic, right, is Ahmed. So some people think that's referring to, or similar to Ahmed, and so some people think, oh, well, that was a prophecy that Muhammad was coming, and that he's the consoler, which is a bit strange because one doesn't think of Muhammad being very comforting, but a baptism of fire isn't very comforting either. Yeah. And then these statutes actually start with some sort of prayer to Muhammad, don't they?
Well, so that's so there's 3 prayers offered during the consolamentum, right?
Oh, yeah. So
it starts with Moses, then prayer from the gospel, and then it's called the Baphomet prayer. And so, but the Baphomet prayer seems to be talking about Muhammad, except for also it isn't.
Okay.
So I'll get to that real fast. So it has a section from the Quran, or what I think is the Quran. I know that in the Quran often like forgetfulness is invoked as a reason why people sin.
Yes.
So this, I'll read the prayer of Baphomet. It says, as a third prayer, we approve of Baphomet, which reads, in the name of God, the gracious and merciful, we thank God, the Lord of the universe, the gracious and merciful, the day of judgment. We worship you, we trust you, we send us on the right path, the way of those who have chosen you, not on the path of those whom may be angry with you, or on the path of the unfaithful ones. Let me just get to the good part.
It's pretty good so far.
Here we go. And ask you that you do not want to take vengeance on us for the sake of our forgetfulness and error. There we go. So it kind of sounds like something from the Quran, and I think some commentator at some point said it was from the Quran, but it might be Merzdorf himself, but I'll just take it as word. The issue is the section afterwards is about the unveiling of the idol, and then it's talking about taking an idol of Baphomet out of a box, which doesn't really sound particularly Muslim to me.
Right. But then we have the idea that the word Baphomet is an old word for Muhammad, and was also actually used as a term for a generic term for an idol that would be worshipped by a heretical or blasphemous cult.
That's true, but I bet the derivation of that last meaning comes from these Templar trials. That's just my guess.
No, I think the whole thing must have emerged at the same time. I shouldn't get into my conclusion about the whole thing, but it's like the more I look into these primary documents about this particular subject, it makes me question the history of the 3 primary religions and what their relationships were to the Templars in the first place, and what the Crusades were really all about in the first place. So we don't have to get into all that now, but that's just jumping out at me. So please, if you wanted to say more, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just stick with this a little bit longer. So once the idol's out of the box, and the box is actually a Greek word, I can't remember what it is, but it means like a box you carry medicine or like cosmetics in. So it can't be too large, maybe like a coffer, something like that. Okay. This might be the head. I don't know. Just an idol. But it says, at one point in this rite, it says, now all the brothers come to the receptor, one by one, kiss the idol and touch it with their girdle.
Okay.
Finally, the elect brothers may do the same. And then there's just... So, I'm not sure if this is actually referring to the scandalous kiss, that was osculum...
Infamy, I think.
Infame, yeah.
Infame, yeah.
Yeah. So, before we go any further, I'm going to kind of sum up sort of what these statutes are saying.
Sure, go ahead.
And just sort of like the structure of them. So, there's 4 sections of statutes. The first one is known as the Tricension Rule, and that comes from the city of Troyes, Troyes, in France. I believe there is some sort of meeting between Templar leaders, and this was sort of like the statutes agreed upon. And it's basically what you'd expect from a religious knightly order in this era. So it's things like don't go around Jerusalem alone. You have to have like a accountability buddy with you at all times, and like when the prayers are, and like not to look upon the face of a woman, and how many times a day you have to pray, and the prayer silently, and what you can eat at what time, things like that. And that's relatively established academically that's legitimate today, and in Merzdorf's time. You notice that no one really doubts that that's real or fake. I actually found, just earlier today, I found a translation of the Merzdorf document. I was like, wow, I wasted my time on this, but it was just this. It was just this first section,
right?
And some guy got his master's degree because he translated that.
Well, is it matching up with everything?
Oh, it's exactly what the first section is. Like,
okay,
there's no aberration there.
Yeah.
I would just like someone to give me a master's degree for this, but
yeah,
I'll be okay.
I understand.
So then oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
So then the second section is the beginning of the Secret Statutes. Now this is the latest section, which is kind of weird that it being the second. I think it was obtained by like testimony or interrogation, because it says it was received by two brothers, the Templars, in 1315, and so in 1312 was when the Templars were shut down.
Right.
So I guess it was during the trials or courts, or I don't know.
The first section is something that really was found as having been written down, an official document passed around in the inner circle of the order, and then somehow actually ended up in this document that Merzdorf discovered. And then appended to that was also further statutes that are derived from confessions. Is that what you're saying?
Just the second one seems to be derived from a confession.
Okay.
Because it says it's narrated by these two brothers in 3 years after the Templars are no longer established. So that's the only thing I could come up with.
Huh.
But yeah, like some other German scholar published the Tricentennial Rule, the first set of statutes, separately from this, I think afterwards. So, but as I said, academically, or in the academy, they don't seem to dispute or call into question the legitimacy of that first set of statutes. The second one is the first set of secret statutes, and they're narrated. It's kind of long. It kind of deals with the idea of having, like, you have an initiatory secret society, and then you have people who aren't, and they're in the same organization. It's like deals with how you sort of functionally run that by keeping things separate, and who you let in, and what sort of signs to look for in a person that you want to let into the secret organization.
What are the
and
signs?
Things like that.
Well,
So it depends on the type of person you're looking at. So there's like talking about lay people. They're like, oh, lay people are easy. You don't need to worry about them too much. But like bishops and like masters of science and abbots, those kinds of people you have to watch out for. You have to like get them alone. Make sure you never tell them about like where you guys meet at night underground and things like that.
Wow.
And so there's actually a good bit of theology in that second section. And I'll go over that when we get deeper into down to the brass tacks, as they say.
Well, okay.
So the third section is sort of the juiciest, most lurid part. So this is written down by Robert of Sanford, I think.
This is a Templar brother here?
Yeah, he's a Templar brother. He's the procurator of the Templar houses in England, and he wrote this in 1204. So this is like the midpoint, I think, of the lifespan of the Templar organization.
So what do you think he wrote it in English and then it got translated from there?
I actually do, because this section is the easiest to translate the Latin from.
Huh. I wonder if there's an English copy somewhere.
I don't know. Because I was having some issues, because I think some of the different language speakers write in Latin differently. So.
Oh, yeah.
This was the easiest section to translate. But it basically just gives a rundown on what the consolamentum, the rite, is. Now, there's also another rite that's noted in your book, the electionis, or the chosen, the elect. That particular rite isn't expounded on, but like the people who are of that rank or degree or association or whatever it is are talked about in relation to people doing the consolamentum, and they're in the same room. So I'm not too sure what they're about, but primarily the secret statutes are about the consolamentum. And it primarily just goes over what happens in the rite and what is expected of someone who's inducted into this.
Okay.
But there's some things, I believe in the second section it says things like no one can make any record of what is being spoken of or said during a chapter meeting. So there's definitely still some question marks on what's actually going on in these meetings that are described as nocturnal and underground.
Wow. Anything about castration? Hinting or otherwise?
I don't know. We'll get back to that when I'll talk about the associations that the Templars have with outside religious groups.
Sure.
And then finally we have fourth section, written by the Master Roncellinus. Okay. That was the person who compiled it. The person who wrote it was still Robert of Sanford in England. So this whole fourth section is kind of strange. It's about what signs to use when you can't talk out in public to refer to things.
Okay.
So people won't catch on that there's some kind of secret organization in the Templars. So if you wanted to talk about, it says a master of masonry, you'd do this one hand sign, which is like pounding metal with a hammer between your two fists. Or if you want to talk about a clergyman coming, you could do this sign. Because at first I thought these were like ranks in the organization with like penalty signs and stuff, but it's actually just like sign language, just to be able to communicate without drawing any attention to yourself.
Why would they need to talk secretly about stonemasons and stuff, just like for practical purposes?
Well, no, when they're talking about stonemasons, so the Latin term is magister masoneria, so that's just unambiguously masters of masonry. There's no other way to translate that.
Okay.
They specifically say that people who build large buildings are knowledgeable in the secret arts of God. That's what they say.
Okay.
And that their fathers are the same fathers as the Templars.
Uh-huh.
Right.
Okay. So if you're talking about stonemasons, you're already talking about people that are part of some elect group, and that the Templars are from the same group.
Right.
Okay.
Well, so this says. So I'm going to have a little aside from there and talk about questions of legitimacy for a moment.
Sure.
So this is something Merzdorf talks about. I'm not going to just 100% follow what he says, but there's three conclusions you can come to when reading this. Either it's perfectly legitimate, it's a Masonic hoax, or a Masonic forgery. And as we go through this discussion, we'll kind of develop all those. But there's some signs that look like it might be like Masonic embellishment to sort of boost the prestige of the organization, kind of like expand their mythology, make them seem like have a much greater past. And then there's other things that like just happened and like we know for a fact was the case, and this is one of the only documents that affirms what we now know archaeologically or otherwise, like especially with these underground Templar caves that are all over England. Like they didn't know about that 200 years ago.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, they didn't, did they?
No, but it's referenced as like build underground tunnels around the churches or preceptories.
Yeah, like that one is in Royston Caves. Did people know about that back then?
I don't know. There's several, at least in England. I can't find any in mainland Europe, at least in the English language. But there's several in England.
Yeah. Huh.
I mean, that one they just discovered a few years ago. So I'm going to read a little quote from Merzdorf to start this off. It says, let us recall that from the trial acts, or trial documents, and testimonies, we can put together the following accusations. 1. Denial of Christ and mocking the cross. 2. Devil worship and sorcery. 3. Adoration of an idol. 4. Contempt for the sacraments and omission of the sacramental words in the Mass. 5. Heresies and confession. 6. Scandalous kisses. 7. Girding with the belt. And 8. Evil call of the order. And if one compares these accusations with the present statutes, one will not be able to ignore the view that these statutes coincide perfectly with those statements, and that therefore one may well be inclined to believe them outright. So all the documented crimes that the Catholic Church levied against the Templars seem to be validated by this document.
There's a part about desecrating the cross and stuff. What does it explain? What is that about? Like,
yes.
Obviously they're Christians. Why are they doing that?
Okay, so the secret statutes seem to have, I'll just call it a front, up front. It seems like a front to look less heretical, but it's still heretical. So their theology seems to be kind of more in with like modern mainline Protestantism. So that you see things in the statutes, especially in the second set, that's like any person can be a priest, any person could, like, you don't need ordination to give mass. You don't like. There's no special indwelling in a cross. There's no reason to respect the material that like a cross is made out of. There aren't certain times of the day you need to pray. There aren't certain prayers you need to say. So things like that, and that's actually kind of similar to the Waldensians.
Yeah. Okay.
As a Gnostic group, because they were sort of like the least. I don't know, like. Deviated the least from the Catholic teaching. They didn't really have as much innovations as the other so thought of as Gnostic groups. And talking about the Waldensians, I'm going to bring up sort of there's sort of an assumed common bond between the Templars and these other persecuted religious groups that's reflected in the statutes themselves. So I'll read a little quote. This is from Section 2, Statute 8, and the title of this is Concerning Those Who Can Be Admitted to the Nighttime Chapters of the Baptized, the Constellati. And these are the people that are allowed to come to the nighttime underground meetings of the Templars.
Okay.
So there's the people of Toulouse who call themselves good people, and those are what we think of now as the Cathars. They didn't really call themselves Cathars that much.
Right.
They are the bonum homines, I guess.
Good men. All right.
Good. The Poor of Lyons, who are the Waldensians. The Albigensians, who had the crusade against them, and those are in France, and those are sort of, you write about them in your Baphomet Temple Mystery Unveiled. There's also some other Gnostic groups that are more obscure, like the Banyolinsians, and people who live in Verona and Bergamo who are Gnostics. Also, Bogomils are mentioned. Yep. And that's just some. Later, they talk about making company with in the underground chambers with Saracens, which is Muslims, Druzes, and Jews.
What Eliphas Levi said about them as the synthesis of all persecuted faiths is summed up with what you just said. It's like everybody who's rejected by the official church can come to the underground party.
Right.
Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead. Yeah. And then obviously that's where the first Christians were doing their stuff too. And they got accused of the same kind of stuff by the Romans that Christian heretics later got accused of by the Roman Church. But anyway, please continue.
Okay. And so the secret statutes are sort of, at least the second section, are sort of a betrayal of a lot of what's put forward in the first section. So there's a whole lot of ink put down about when you can eat and like what you can eat on certain days and when you're allowed to eat meat and things like that. And then there's like a statute in the second section that's like, you don't need to worry about when you need to eat stuff. You can just eat whatever you want whenever. So you have like sort of very established Catholic doctrine in the first part, and you have this, as I said, it looks like mainline modern Protestantism in the second, with some strange deviations. So I'll talk about one here. They're talking about, there's a statute, let me find it. It's talking about what sort of books you should put in your Templar libraries. I'm going to have to Control F for that. So I'm not familiar with all of these. It says things like the Master of the Unification of Nature, Atos of Vercelli, or this is translated kind of weird. There's like Monologium, Proslogium. I don't know all these, but it does say they particularly emphasize and recommend getting these writings by Master Amalric of Benna and David of Donat. So I looked at these guys. Amalric, he was head of a sect called the Amalricians, who Wikipedia calls, I believe, a pantheistic free love movement.
Wow. I think the Waldensians were essentially referred to it the same way.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so these guys, it kind of reminds me of the Templars, not the Templars, excuse me, the Assassins, because they believe that there's a third age. There's the age of Abraham and the age of the Son. The age of the Father is the age of Abraham, and the age of the Son. The third age is the age of the Holy Spirit. And they believed that you couldn't sin if you were with the Holy Spirit. If you were unable to, and that's sort of like the consolamentum, right? Being with the Holy Spirit. You can't sin if you're with the Holy Spirit.
And that's what makes you perfect?
Right, and it reminds me of I guess they're the Albigensians, you can't sin from your waist down.
Yeah.
It's sort of similar. And then also these 3 ages are pretty similar to Crowley's 3 aeons.
Yep.
I can't remember what the first one is. It's the mother?
It's mother, father, and child, yeah.
Slain and rising God, and then crown and conquering child.
So yeah, it does sound very similar.
Yeah,
it kind of goes to Montanus, actually. He was an Orthodox theologian, but he was ultimately condemned by the Apostolic Church as a heretic because of he claimed like he was also the Paraclete. But there was like 3 ages, right? There was the age of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, right? And we live in the age of the Holy Spirit. So a lot of other people also think this way too. But what's funny though, there's a church father by the name of Tertullian. He was a very hard-lined Catholic proponent, and he was a very greatly opposed to heresy and Gnosticism. But what's funny about him is that he actually wound up converting to the Montanist faith too, in the end.
He did?
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. And the symbolism of the fire, on the head of Baphomet, right? It also connects to like the fire that is breathed down of the apostles in the Acts of the Apostles. So you have these later imagery co-opting Christian imagery into their occult system, I guess. If you want to call it that.
This other guy I mentioned, David of Dinant, he was he was also an Amalrician, and he, according to Wikipedia, it says he identified God with the materia prima materia.
Yeah.
And there's another thing about him. Let me see if I can find it. Basically, these people regrouped and formed a group within the Catholic Church in like the 1500s, the Amalricians. I can't figure out what the name of that group is right now, but they kind of stuck around and had their own legacy within the church. Which kind of reminds me that like some of the Templars were moved into the Knights Hospitalier after the breakup, and then the Knights Hospitalier was moved into the Knights of Malta after they were broken up. So like, still kind of like a chain there. And I think, last year the Pope reintegrated the Knights of Malta formally into the Catholic Church. So who knows? Maybe there's some Templars knocking around still in there.
Well, don't you? I mean, I guess maybe this is the wrong time to branch off into this, but it seems to me like whatever the Templars were into might not just have been the secret doctrine of the Templars. They were chartered by the church, and at least the priests within the Templars, my understanding is they were priests of the Catholic Church too. So do we really know that they were deviating from what might have been the secret inner doctrine of the priesthood of Catholicism? And maybe this was just an embarrassing incident that had to be swept away, and that's why all of the documents end up in the Vatican Library and get found throughout in different epochs of history. And when they come out, it's like kind of apologetic, like, well, here's some context for what was going on with the Templars, and then it's always presented in such a way that the church tried to control them, and we tried to reform them, and then we tried to wash our hands of them. And, at no point do they want the inquiry to go any further than the idea that the Templars might have been a heretical sect. They don't want you to think about, well, what other context can we now think of the origins of Christianity in, where this might have been more normal. And throughout, since they were around for 300 years or so, as time went on, it became less acceptable to, for these things to be known about in public, because Christianity itself had become something different, at least for public consumption. Does that fit with what you're looking at?
possibly, I'm going to read a statute right here that basically openly promotes subversion of institutions, including the Catholic Church.
Okay.
I mean, and you could look at it like with the Catholic Church was in 1080, whenever it was, when they broke off with the Orthodox Church, that the Pope declaring that he could render previous things that were called infallible by the Church infallible by his own word could have been like the first in the heterodoxy from the original teachings of the Church, and there's just different groups coming in and infiltrating it and changing it from the inside out over and over again since then, to the point where it's deviated to the point where it has. But anyway, I'll read this statute real fast. It's called Concerning External Conduct of the Consoled. It says, since you are free from every yoke of bondage, which enthralls the children of New Babylon, and they're talking about the Catholic Church when they say that.
Wow.
Charmed by the spirit of the worst dogmas, you must assign yourself as a servant to all so that you may deliver the elect and the light into freedom. Therefore appear to the Jews and Saracens as Jews and Saracens, so that you may win over Jews and Saracens. To those who are under the law of New Babylon, may it appear as if you are likewise under that law, though you are exempted from it by the election and the baptism of fire, the consolamentum, that you may set free those who are bound by the laws of New Babylon. May you be all so that you may save all.
Wow.
But all things are cautious about the external gospel of the one God, so that you may fully share it, avoiding all zeal that does not seek wisdom, so that you may never provoke offense or anger, be it the Jews, nor the Saracens, or the citizens of the kingdom of God, or even the servants of New Babylon.
So, be everything so you can save everything. This very much reminds me of stuff that Crowley later said, where you have to unite yourself with everything, even the most horrible things, and that's, the way to become the Godhead, I guess. I don't know. There's probably more to it, more to what it does for you than that, but what you were just saying reminded me of that. And then there's this other thing you just said that reminds me of something that an officer in a local OTO lodge said to me, where you talked about delivering the elect into light and to freedom. And what the OTO officer had told me was that he thought the purpose of the Templars, and consequently the purpose of his own order as a continuation of the Templars, was in a very literal sense to lead pilgrims to the Holy Land. And then he sort of let it drop there, left this pregnant pause waiting for me to mentally fill in the gap of what that's supposed to mean. And the impression I got was that we're talking about some other dimension, or we're talking about actual soul salvation or something like that, but we're talking about gathering up people and then delivering them to something outside of this world. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. It's just, again, it's amazing to me how these documents that probably were not available to Aleister Crowley or anybody else that he would have been working with, somehow he still created an order that does seem to be continuing a lot of the same ideas and even specific phrases that the Templars apparently used.
Oh, we'll get there right now, actually. I'll just link everything you just said. I'm going to read the statute from the third section, and I'm going to crank it up a notch. This one's a little crazy. This is 18, the completion of the consolamentum. It says, at the end of the chapter, the receptor will take the newly baptized to the library that night or another, and show him the secret science of God, the sonship of God, of Jesus, and the true Baphomet, of New Babylon, the nature of things and eternal life. Also, the secret arts of man, of great philosophy, of Abraxas and talismans, be it in its whole extent or only in parts, as it appears useful and expeditious. We wish and demand that the completion of the consolamentum, as well as the knowledge of the signs, be withheld as long as possible from the accepted clergy, monks, ministers, bishops, and masters of science. And we got one more after this, just to continue with the theme.
Go ahead.
Concerning the practice of arts. But we expressly command and dictate that in houses, this is just talking about where Templars are housed.
Chapter houses?
Yeah, Well, not like the underground one, but like sort of like their front. Like,
right.
Like if they're stationed in a preceptory or like temporary lodging or something. That in houses where every single resident brother is not elect or baptized, so if there's a place where there's Templars that are uninitiated, certain matters should not be worked upon by philosophical art. That is, to take imperfect metals of their own element and to transmute them into true gold and silver by said art. But if adepts want some of this art to be worked, they are only able to do this for themselves in distant houses, under the greatest discretion and for the benefit of the baptized.
Whoa.
Mm-mm.
So they're doing alchemy, too. That's probably how they got rich. Sorry, go ahead.
I mean, it could just be the figurative sort where you're,
right.
like, elevating someone to the golden spiritual state.
Yes.
Going through the sun or whatever.
But, I mean, look, is there another document that is in any way connected to the Templars or even about the Templars that's, from a long time ago, from history, that talks about them in relation to alchemy and using these alchemical terms? Because I can only think of, like, modern, occult orders that like to claim that the Templars were doing alchemy and stuff like that. But I've never seen any evidence of it except now, like what you're telling me. Right.
I'm also going to talk about this little phrase of abrac and talismans.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, is that Abraxas?
It can only be, since, I mean, the word abrac I can only find, I've looked in either Masonic research, Masonic books, or by Joseph Smith's mother. Since it's like always tied in with talismanic magic,
yeah,
or like evocation, I guess it has to be Abraxas. And then some of like the commentators in like the 17th or 18th century, when they see this phrase, they directly connect it with Abraxas. But the Masonic authors themselves don't. However, another interesting thing about Abrac is it tends to appear in groups of the secret arts of the Masons. Though not these arts that are listed here with the Templars. Let me bring up an example real fast.
The word Abrac, not Abraxas?
Abrac. It seems to be used exclusively by Masons or people researching them.
Huh.
Or Joseph Smith's mother.
Right, okay. Well, they're Masons too.
They were. Okay, here's one in Middle English. I'll just read for fun. I'm not going to read it in Middle English, though. Let's read it in Modern English.
Please.
They conceal the art of keeping secrets, that so the world may conceal nothing from them. They conceal the art of wonder-working, of foresaying things to come, that so the same arts may not be said wicked of them to an evil end. They also conceal the art of changes, the way of winning, the faculty of abrac, the skill of becoming good and perfect without the help of fear and hope, I don't know what that means, and the universal language of the Masons. And there's a little note about abrac. It says, faculty of abrac. Here I am utterly in the dark.
Faculty of abrac. So this just must be another term for, magic. That's what I'm thinking.
Or talisman. So, like, I can't find it right now, but one commentator says it has to do with saying the secret word that activates talismans or something like that. I mean, of course, this guy doesn't necessarily know anything.
But, I mean, this Abraxas thing is all over the Templars. They had the seals that used it, and...
Right, and that sort of validates, it's one point of legitimacy to this, that they actually did have a relation to talismans, depictions of Abraxas. They were found on the grounds of the Templar churches. Yeah,
and then if you look at the Duc de Blocus, his collection in the British Museum that has the alleged Templar artifacts that Hammer Purgstall wrote about, the rest of the collection in the British Museum is just other stuff that Duc de Blocus collected. Tons of it are these little, I think they call them intaglios, these little amulets that have Abraxas on them in all sorts of variations. And I don't think anyone had ever claimed that those were among the Templar artifacts, but just the fact that they're kind of collected in the same collection by the same person who also made a whole bunch of other really key contributions to archaeology that dated certain key events in what is now accepted history. I think that the connection between the Templars and their type of Gnosticism that they were doing, whatever that was, and then these Abraxas amulets and doing what you're describing, magic with the amulets, with the Abrax amulets, seems to definitely be something that is just very much associated with the Templars, apparently. But I don't think that anyone that was an actual historian, put this stuff together ever. So the associations are there, but no one's ever actually mentioned that officially.
And there's one other mention of Abrax in the Merzdorf document, and this is spicy. It's in the 4th section about the secret signs. And the second one, it says, if a master mason does not seem to be an ordinary man, ask him, where does the light of your craft come from? He answers, from Abrax. He is a son of our fathers and our brother.
He is a son of our fathers and our brother? Okay. It's kind of redundant, but okay.
It's a strange thing to square with that sentence with sort of everything that's known about Abraxas.
You're saying that a Templar might not be human, basically, or he might get his power from a non-human source. He might be a vector for something supernatural that's called Abrax.
Right, and it reads weird. He is a son of our fathers. Like whoever was the progenitor of Freemasonry, bore this thing, and it told them how to be Freemasons. It's strange. I mean, perhaps there's some sort of philosophical thing we're missing there.
But yeah, I also wondered if they're just literally saying that there's some people in our order, because of course a lot of them were from noble families. There's some people in our order that are literally, the sons of this Abrax fellow, and that they are vectors for his light.
And then also there's the light angle of this, because in Freemasonry, in the rituals, why do you come forward to the Freemasons? It's to seek light. It's the whole point of their order, right?
Yes.
It's to seek the light from the blazing star, the hole in the ceiling, or whatever it is.
So, I mean, it definitely sounds like, what you're describing here is the secret Templar rituals are also, perhaps the original Masonic rites, or that there was a Masonic order that went back far beyond the Templars, and they were doing, they were a permutation of that, which is exactly what you're saying.
I'll say something parallel to that gives that some credence, I guess. There's a book, I think it was written in the either late 1800s or early 1900s. It's called The Secret Sects of Syria and the Lebanon. It's a Masonic book.
Okay.
By a 30th degree Freemason. And he's like, so we know Freemasonry comes from the East, so he goes over and he talks about his travels, going to all these different sects and talking to them, religious sects, and and goes through some of the history of different Ishmaelites and is that the right word? The Gnostic sort of predecessors to the Assassins, and the Druzes and stuff like that. And an interesting thing is, he says that the Druzes, when he talks to them, he would do his Masonic signs and they'd recognize it and answer in turn. But the verbal passwords weren't corresponding. They weren't mutually intelligible if you translated them into Arabic or whatever. I'm not sure they spoke Arabic at that point. 100 years. Doesn't matter. Yeah. But and also the Druzes said to him that they were the original builders of the Temple of Solomon.
Wow. The star that is the symbol of the Druzes now that has different. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's the what is it? Order of the Eastern Stars. It's the same colors.
It's almost the same symbol, but I think the colors are in a slightly different order. But yeah, it's the same colors. So it's
so Wikipedia calls it Druze a Neoplatonic Abrahamic religion or something. Yeah. So they have secret male only meetings, and I've heard a Druze online say like they recognize Hermes Trismegistus as one of their prophets, but that's not like openly spoken. Like because like they had like their doctrine is secret, like officially, and so and this guy who wrote this book, he said he was a 30th degree Mason. He went to these meetings and they had him and they said that they had they were the original builders of the Temple of Solomon, which would sort of be like what the Masons hearken to when they call themselves Masons.
Right. There's been a lot of people not agreeing about whether there really was ever a Temple of Solomon in what we are now calling Israel. And, you know, some people say that, well, that's just a story that either refers to something maybe somewhere else in the world or maybe some other, it's a metaphor or something, but, you know, they're not finding the real foundation there in Jerusalem that actually dates back to the alleged time period. So I wonder myself if these stories refer to something else that the various sects of the East might have their own stories about this thing. You know, it's not something that belongs to the Jews per se. You know, there's some other thing that they're referring to when they talk about the Temple of Solomon and building it, and the Templars may have had the secret about that.
Well, even in the biblical narrative, the Jews don't build the temple; they get workers from Tyre, which is like where the Druzes live now. So,
good point. Where should we go from here?
Do you have anything, Alex?
Well, I just wanted to go back what I mentioned earlier about that Simonian baptism ritual.
Okay.
I actually found in our book here, here's what we wrote, or I wrote. Simon's successor, Menander, thought that he could make his followers immortally youthful by a baptismal ceremony, as indicated by Irenaeus and against heresies. And then I go, the baptism practiced by the Simon cult involved fire appearing over the water, as recorded by the anonymously produced text, a treatise on rebaptism attributed to Pseudo-Cyprian. Then it goes on to say, and some of them try to argue that they only administer a sound and perfect baptism, not as we, a mutilated and curtailed baptism, whatever that means, which they are in such wise said to designate that immediately after they have descended into the water, fire at once appears upon the water. So, I don't know if that has anything to do with the Templar rituals, the fire baptism. I don't know what it really means, but I just thought it was worth clarifying, I guess.
But one last thing is during the Consolamentum, right, there's three prayers, the prayer of Moses, prayer of Jesus, and the prayer of Baphomet in order. And that seems kind of analogous to what the Amalricians said about the age of the Father, the age of the Son, and the age of the Holy Spirit. And then one last thing about the Baphomet is it seems like the Muhammad equivalent is a cover.
Yeah.
It's sort of like the central, almost a central part of just like our curiosity in the document is it just says the word Baphomet in it.
Uh-huh.
And there's a small idol of Baphomet that's like kissed and caressed in your groin or in your girdle or whatever that means.
Oh, that would be the belts that they supposedly had that they used to touch the idol.
That's right. They have special red belts.
Yeah.
And I can't really. Do you know anything about the belts? I don't. I'm not really too familiar with them.
All I know is that was just like one of the things that just kept getting repeated over and over again.
I asked about the belts because in the secret signs, there's like a sign for a belt. Like you can't be talking about the belt in public.
Ah. Yeah. So okay, they. I'll just finish my sentence. Was that they every Templar that said anything about the secret rituals, they all mentioned the belts. And that you would wear this belt around when you were having a ritual in which the Baphomet was unveiled, and you would walk towards it and bring the end of the belt with you and touch the Baphomet's idol with it, and that would bring the Baphomet power from it into you. So that was a way of transferring the power. So that's what I know.
Huh.
Yeah, they were very specific, actually, about the belts. And I figure that this is connected to the use of the cable toe now in Freemasonic rituals. But anyway, go on, please.
That's basically it. It seems like they're. I mean, just reading it seems like it's a front to make equivalent the Baphomet to Muhammad. Just because there's just what's going on there is very un-Muslim compared to what's going on in the prayer of Abraham and the prayer of Jesus. Like, that's just pretty standard readings from the Bible.
Yeah, but what if the whole idea of that Baphomet and Muhammad were somehow connected at all is just the idea that people were so confused about those matters back then, and people thought of the Orient as being mysterious, and so the idea of there being pagan cults over there, people did not separate that from the idea of Islam, because the theology of Islam was not being explained to the populace. They just knew it was this foreign thing. So that's why, if you were to go like to the Oxford English Dictionary, where they claim that Baphomet is Muhammad and that Muhammad was a generic word for idol, that's the idea they're trying to throw about there, that, everyone was just so ignorant and confused back then. But what if not only did not very many people know about the theology of Islam, but what if the theology of Islam had not been settled, just as it seems, the theology of Christianity took a long, long time to be settled, and then the practices to be normalized, and then for everyone in the public to know that and know what they're supposed to be doing. So if the Templars were operating in a time period in which that hadn't been settled yet, and they're also, what everyone's been saying, they're interacting with the inner hierarchies of the groups that are operating in the Islamic world, the secret groups just like theirs. So, everyone was just thinking, well, that's how they're sharing Gnostic knowledge. And like you were describing the Ismailis, they have similar theology, I guess you would call it, and philosophy to what we've been talking about here. This idea of everything is permitted, nothing is really settled. Once you're one of us, you can't really sin anymore. That dirtiness of sin has been taken away from you. Not everyone would necessarily agree to label that point of view Gnostic, but I think what Alex and I did with the Baphomet book was show how things that are, were associated with heretical Christian sects, and things that were associated with what were later, or at the time called witchcraft covens, or, then supposedly there were groups of Satanists within the Catholic Church doing black masses, and then now we have, your modern Western occultist orders, and they all have this doctrine, whether it's like overt, like the Church of Satan is, or covert, like all the secret societies are, where when you get to the inner doctrine, you find that none of the rules apply to you, and that all of the religious traditions of the world somehow have a common origin and some kind of common truth to them, and that you're really a spiritual brother to every persecuted heretic all over the world, because you all have something in common. And it's not just being persecuted, it's what you're being persecuted for. It's the exact same doctrine, which I think is so weird, because you think, it's like everything. Like, why do we live in a Judeo-Christian world where, like, everything goes back to the same set of traditions and myths? Like, how did this one set of myths take over the world, and then there's 3 different branches of it that are seemingly so different in terms of the culture they produce, and yet the core of it is the same? Why are we all doing the same trip? I don't know, but it also seems like what we would think of as the antithesis of it, is really, that's the doctrine that the institutions that have pushed all of this on us in the first place are really observing. So it's like we all get fed this, the mainstream religion of the country we're born in, and then you find out that the institutions that are running your society, a lot of them are influenced by these tiny groups that do secret things you don't know about until someone like you or I comes along and looks at the secret doctrine and finds out, they don't actually follow the same rules you do. And not only that, they think it's really sacred and special that they don't follow the same rules. So, I don't know. What do you want to say to that? Go ahead. I'll end my speech there.
That reminded me of not directly going from that, but that reminded me of a few things I needed to say. For one, there's this little section about kind of like what to do once someone is edited, and I guess it means like chosen to be like prepared for the ritual to the rite. But it says, if you arouse in this way the repugnance of the syncretism and craving of our knowledge, as you will notice, it will be reported on in the next chapter. So they're talking about whenever you're sort of like leading someone into this, if you see that they're like sneering at the syncretism, at like the doctrine, the universal doctrine they're saying, as you were saying, you need to like report on it later. And then there's a really weird, and all of these statutes are sort of like almost like cutesy theological support of everything they put forward, like with like biblical foundation, except there's this one statute, if I can find it. It's about killing people.
Oh,
it's about killing people who spill secrets.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. Okay, it's called concerning betrayal and swearing. If one is found to have betrayed even the slightest of the secret statutes, the signs, or of what is being discussed in nocturnal chapters out of recklessness or talkativeness, then he shall, in time, according to the magnitude of his offense, chain his punishments served and never be allowed to continue to attend chapters. But when it is known that he has committed treachery in the corruption of his heart, he should be kept in perpetual imprisonment, or if the common good seems to require it, punished with secret death.
Wow. See, so that's why none of this information has come out all this time. It might have come out, but then they just killed the guy and destroyed all the records of it.
I guess once the organization was gone and they were being interrogated, there wasn't anyone to enforce these things. So they're definitely much more out with it.
Yeah.
Being interrogated.
But, okay, so, again, I mean, definitely not nice guys. And then I'm wondering, too, like, do you have the right to say no when you're being presented with the butt to be kissed and you decide, okay, I don't really want to do this?
I'm not sure. I know that if after you spit on the cross, you curse the name of Jesus, they like exclude you. You're not invited back.
Wait, okay, so you're saying if you do or if you don't, then they curse you?
If you do spit on the cross, but then curse the name of Jesus, like you think that's like what's going on, they're like, you're not allowed.
Okay, so you're supposed to get that this is against the cross, but not Jesus. So you're supposed to spit on the cross and then say, whoa, I'm not going to say anything bad about Jesus.
That's right.
And you're supposed to know that.
Yeah.
See, well, I wonder if it's more common back then for someone to get a concept like that, because no one in the last 300 years or so would. But maybe back then they would have understood the idea that Jesus is something bigger. Or, I mean, how else would they know? Would you be told ahead of time, here's the thing you're supposed to say?
I think it's a selection process. I think that's just like the people they're looking for. It's like people who can abstractly reason like that. If they're going to teach them alchemy or whatever, like actually there is a thing that says like do not try to induct people who are like feeble-minded.
Yeah.
Or scant-minded. These like stupid people. Like don't. So they're looking for, just like any of these societies they're looking for pretty clever people.
I
kind
guess
of monopolize that.
Because, I mean, if you think about, like, how many different interpretations one goes through of what the mysteries are, if you were to go through all the rites of Scottish rite, of course, I've never done it, but if you just read Morals and Dogma, I'm sure it's changed since then a little bit, but that still gives you an idea.
Stands for geometry.
Yeah. So that's chapter 1, and then by the time you get to the 32nd degree, it's like some translation of a demon's name, but that's really God, and you're supposed to understand that, and it's okay. Everything's okay. And so it's like what kind of person is not so irreligious, not so materialistic as to be turned off by the religiosity and the ritualism of the organization in the first place, right? So they're attracted to that, and they're aware that there's charity work and good works going on, and you have to be involved in that too. And you get into this group, and then every stage along the way, the symbols are reinterpreted for you over and over again until they're the exact opposite of what you were told in the first place. And what kind of person goes through that without ever triggering suspicion that they're not going along with it? And yet they're not feeble-minded, because they're not just passively accepting it either. They're learning from it, and they're intuitively understanding it. So that's got to be, a very rare person.
Well,
go ahead.
There is the fact that you can't back out of it.
Yeah, well, tell me more about...
If you're being killed for infractions, and you see that as a member, then you're kind of stuck if you notice that there's a problem with the theology, if you personally disagree with something. Like, you're just kind of... You can't look like you have your foot halfway out the door,
Yes. Well, so, is it like then, if you believe in Pizzagate stuff and QAnon theories and SRA stories that we've all heard for 20 or 30 years now, if you believe that stuff like that is happening, and that people who are in positions of power or who are being groomed for that are all being en masse compromised with blackmail material that almost always somehow involves having sex with, torturing, killing children, often in a ritualized setting. So if you believe in that stuff, the idea with that is that you may not know that that's what you're getting involved in the beginning, but you get hints along the way, and then by the time it's totally confirmed, it's too late because you're part of it and you're a guilty party as well. So you can never really get out without just putting yourself in, for one thing, probably life in prison, but then you'll probably even be shanked in prison because you will be murdered one way or another for betraying them. So I know that stuff like that does happen. I don't know to what extent the broader theories are true, but I know that Hammer Purgstall, when he wrote about the Templars, that Orientalist, he said that he thought that that's exactly what they were doing too, and that's how they were controlling their members. The artifacts that he discovered, he didn't belabor this point because child abuse was not really a big deal back then. Nobody really talked about the rights of children, so that the fact that children were being harmed potentially in rituals was not like the big headline for him. But he was just writing about sodomy rights, and then also showing the pictures that seem to depict that. And they involve creatures that, according to the pictures, are either like little elf men or they are children. And it could be either, really. But we know that the Templars did, especially I think in the later years, induct very young members. So someone as young as 10, I know, in England was inducted, and they would have been also invited to spit on the cross and kiss another guy's butt and all this stuff, which I don't think that it specifies in the document you have that there's actual
no. There's no reference to any sodomy or analingus or anything like that, besides just Merzdorf saying it exists in the past, and it's sort of similar to the rubbing and kissing the idol. Yeah, but another document that came out of the Vatican does seem to have confirmed that much, so that I don't feel like maybe they didn't bother to belabor that point in this document, but I think we know that did happen.
And so, but we don't know, like, if it went as far as some of the other things that other Gnostic sects, for instance, were, I guess Christian Gnostic sects in later years were accused of, but almost all of them. We mentioned the Waldensians, and there were several of these other groups that were accused of the same set of rituals, very similar, having to do with an idol, sometimes with the head of a cat, or it's like a man, it turns into a man, and then it turns into a cat, and then you're doing these rituals that involve group sex, sodomy, and then usually a child is killed, blood is drained. A lot of times, this is what they said about Waldensians, and these are accusers of them, not the Waldensians themselves, but this is what they were accused of: is burning the victim, the baby victim, so that it would turn into ashes, and then they would mix the ashes with blood and make a paste and anoint the idol with it. The same exact things that then European witches would be accused of later. So we don't know that the Templars really did that kind of hardcore stuff, but there was definitely homoerotic overtones to this induction rite. And then their statutes,
their symbol is homoerotic.
And then there's just the proclamation that was supposedly made. This is again according to the Chinon parchment from the Vatican, released by the Vatican, from the confessions they made to the Pope when they were put on their second trial by the Church itself, not just the King of France. That they said it's bad to have sex with women, it's bad to lust after women, and it's so much better that if you have to do that kind of stuff, you should do it with a man.
Well, it was you can't refuse the advancements of a brother, right?
Yeah. It was, again, like, not that it's good, but you got to let it out somehow, and so do it this way instead. Again, it's just like, where do we get our modern ideas of morality now? Because it doesn't come from anything in the past. I can tell you that.
And then there's, I don't know if it's been remarked on, like, their symbol is the two men on the same horse.
Yes. It's been remarked on. It's always treated like, oh, what's wrong with you? You have a dirty mind. And, well, come on. Now we know the truth. So.
And a thing about the murderous angle that I want to touch on briefly is, I think, is interesting is what Merzdorf possibly being a Freemason. He apparently got this from a library, a Masonic library, and he donated all of his occult collection, like his coins and books, to different lodges, Masonic lodges and otherwise, just other societies. But he died before this was published.
So who published it?
His publisher. Like, he submitted it.
Okay.
He just died before it was finished printing. Like, there's a postscript at the end is written by his publisher being like he died. He wasn't able to see it.
Okay. So we don't know what
printed.
he died from.
Well, it says he died of a stroke. But maybe he wasn't supposed to publish this. I don't know.
Well, there were a lot of people who wound up dead of strokes and heart attack stroke combinations and blood clots in the head and things like that. In the late 20th century, it was all related to Priory of Zion secrets coming out. And people in the church that were Priory of Zion members that were putting out little hints and doing interviews and leaking things out. A lot of those people ended up having these bizarre sudden deaths, and the other Priory members who continued to be alive and let out leaks and hints, they indicated that, this is a sign of a church hit, that they know how to do this. They know how to make you die from a stroke or a heart attack suddenly. And I got the idea it's not poison or anything like that they know how to do the voodoo to make you die. So, it's just like, there's so many of these. There's so many of these stories where the guy dies right before something like this comes out, and it still comes out. So it happened with, I don't know. In my mind, all these things connect. It happened with Stanley Kubrick, Eyes Wide Shut. It happened with Pasolini doing 120 Days of Sodom. And then I can't think of all my other examples right now, but there's a bunch of them. That it's like, so when the document finally comes out, then you don't really know if it's been edited or not. And in fact, with Pasolini, we know that several rolls of film disappeared after he was murdered and before the final cut was made. So, we got to wonder, first of all, it's weird that Merzdorf discovers this thing in a Masonic library. Whenever I hear that story, and there's quite a few stories like that having to do with primary documents of the Templars, whether they either find it in a Masonic library or they find it at the Vatican library. And I just think my instinct is to say either that is an item being planted in the library, a fake antiquity, which I think was the case. Again, to go back to the Priory of Zion, just like a modern example, they started the whole mythos of their order by depositing things in the French National Library and making them look like they had been published years earlier and that they had had a broader circulation and some kind of place in history. They created the whole history of their order doing that. So, and I've talked to other people in other secret societies that have told me this is the way they do it. This is the way they create the history of their order and a pedigree to go back to is they just plant these fake documents. All you have to do is get paper that's from the right era, and especially like back in Merzdorf's time, there weren't all the same tricks of archaeologists that there are now. Not everybody knew how to authenticate a document like now. So, I wonder if we could find the original. What do you suppose is the original of this thing? What condition is it in? Is it a printed, bound book somewhere?
Well, I mean, I'm sure if it's a legitimate document, the initial parchment would be like interrogation notes. I'm sure the primary sources are destroyed by now, and if it's in so this goes Vatican library then to a Masonic library. Yeah. I don't know. I have seen a documentary on the Vatican library, and the book seemed pretty well preserved there.
So, you say you don't think there could be funny business happening there ever?
Oh, there absolutely could, and I'm saying you could just go look if you had Vatican Archive access.
Yeah, but I think you have to work for them.
Oh, absolutely.
So.
Oh, yeah, you can't just waltz in there. So there's no way for us to confirm this, but there is a way to confirm it.
There's no way, but there is a way?
For us. I guess it could just kind of radically alter my life with this. But
what, to become
just become ordained and
something?
Yeah, it's kind of like just another Vatican infiltration.
I really don't think they would let you at this point. I'm sure the NSA has already passed this conversation on to the Swiss Guard or whoever handles that material. I don't know. Whoever the Secret Service of the Vatican is.
I think it would be a good time to talk about this Vice article.
Please do, yes. You pointed this out to me yesterday, which is okay. And so many weird things were happening yesterday that I'm working on something, and then the mainstream media puts something out that's basically about it. And you said to me that you thought this Vice article that they put out was basically a way of spoiling the audience ahead of time for any revelations that might come out. Yes.
Yeah, like inoculating them against hearing it and believing it. So, yeah, this came out 2 days ago on Vice. It's called The Strange Centuries-Long History of Satanic Pedophile Panics. And this kind of follows another article they published that was like, why do straight white men hate astrology or something? Anyway, very Vice. So we get to this, and it's sort of talking about there's Pizzagate and QAnon and what's going on. It's been going on since the Middle Ages that there's been these pedophile scares, and that there was satanic panic and all that. And then they start saying there's this paragraph that says, according to Richard Schuberg, a neuropsychologist who has studied the long history of alleged allegations of satanic child abuse and pedophilia rings. These sorts of accusations may stretch back at least as far as the 14th century, when stories of ritualistic child abuse, that's a link, by the Knights Templar Crusader Order were in active circulation. And I've never heard that there's actually been ritualistic child abuse accusations levied towards the Knights Templar, besides you making that accusation.
Yes, I agree with you, because it's not that no one else had said it before. It's just that, again, like I was saying before, there wasn't a movement about child abuse at Hammer Perkstall's time in the early 1800s. So he wasn't saying, oh, hey, look at what these horrible Templars were doing to children. He was saying they're doing these horrible sodomic rites, and they're killing people and animals, and they're having sex with animals, and you can see it all in these pictures that are on these artifacts that I think date back to the Templars. So I guess he's the first person that would even come close to doing anything like that, and he was saying it, but he was not emphasizing child abuse. And that's really the only way that the SRA stories have gotten any traction in modern times. And I think it's just because nobody's horrified to hear that someone's a Satanist, someone's having sex with another guy. None of this is horrifying until you're actually victimizing a child, and then it's like, whoa, hey, there's a problem. So, I think that's why that aspect of it gets emphasized, and then nobody really wants to look at what is this kind of ritual that we're talking about, what's the origin of it, why would all these groups that a lot of them aren't overtly satanic are still being accused of doing this type of thing, not only in ancient times according to this Vice article, but in modern times here. Why are all these secret groups being accused of the same thing, victimizing children in these rituals? Well, the only thing that is really debated in public is whether or not children are being victimized by accused people, and it's treated as a crime, not heresy. Which is basically that's what was at issue in the past. Is someone being orthodox in their doctrine, and no one was really concerned about that kids are getting hurt. So the only thing that could give any kind of credence to what Vice is trying to say, and then they say, oh, these things, didn't they say, you quoted it as going back to the 1400s or the 1300s?
14th
right?
century. They're saying there are accusations in the 14th century of ritualistic child abuse.
Okay, so what I think this is, what the author has perhaps deliberately confused here, is the stories about Gilles de Rais, or Rays or something. I always mispronounce it.
I looked it up. It's Gilles de Rais, like that, something like that. I typed it in Google Translate.
Say it again for me because Skype interrupted.
It's Gilles de Rais.
Gilles de Rais. Okay.
Yeah.
So here's a guy that in that time period was accused of hurting children, and that was it was the same bag of, it's a satanic ritual. He's kidnapping kids, raping them, dismembering them, and it's all actually for the purposes of using their blood and the powers and energies released in this to do alchemical transmutations. Or at least that's the story, the version that I've read, and I have no idea. I've not studied this as a historian. I have not tried to look at the primary documents or anything, but this is the story of Gilles de Rais. Say it again?
Gilles de Rais.
Gilles de Rais. So what I'm thinking is that this is really the birth of the Satanic Panic story they're talking about, but they chose in the Vice article to say it was the Templars. And the only connection is what? It's France. He's a nobleman. He fought with Joan of Arc, but that wasn't the Crusades. So it's like they're just muddying the waters again. It's exactly what you're saying, that if you can just make whatever your opponent is saying sound really crazy by jumbling it up a lot, then when people hear those words again coming out of your opponent's mouth, they'll just think of the crazy theory the way it was incorrectly explained by Vice and just think that you're an idiot. So there's tons of people who think that about me, that I just see Satanists everywhere and I'm just one of these people that, thinks there's child molesters everywhere. And I wasn't that type at all, and that's not how I went into this. It's just, I don't necessarily think that they are everywhere, but I think that the opposite point of view is also wrong. Like, it does happen, and not only that, there's a reason why groups with secret inner doctrines keep being accused of this same thing over and over again. It's a tradition. It means something. So that's all I am saying, and what I've been trying to decode. But yeah, I think you're right that like they because the Vice is definitely a mouthpiece of the MSM, and particularly Vice will tell you what the cool people should think.
There's directly above this quote, there's a video inlet that says, "Inside the satanic temples fight to protect your abortion rights."
Yes, okay, they're always doing this. They're always promoting that one group, the Satanic Temple, that like no one had ever heard of before, and then all of a sudden they're putting up statues and stuff, and they're acting like these people are, so like the ACLU or something. That it's so important that this group is out there harassing every Lions Club that puts up something Christian in their community, and it's what you're saying. Vice is like, I don't know what to say. If someone in the 1980s, someone who was a proponent of the satanic panic that they're talking about, someone back then was told and shown Vice videos and told, this is the future, this is what your grown children are going to find when they log into YouTube every day, they would have been like, oh wow, everything I'm saying is correct, because obviously Satan has taken over and they're feeding this stuff to you and saying, one of them was like, I remember a couple of years ago, you really should be putting things in your anus more. You're really missing out on the fun. It's just like,
start putting things in their butt.
Vice came out with an article called "The Alt-Right Thinks 5G Network Plans Are a Deep State Conspiracy Headed by Google." So, like, they're saying that 5G networks are like so positive and good for you, and that anybody that questions these new systems that they're developing, that they're just nutty Trump supporting alt-righters, So, but they're really a leftist satanic shithole, as I said on my Twitter once.
I'm going to expound on this quote because it's kind of interesting, by Richard Schuberg. It's not a quote because he never said anything about the Templars.
Okay, it's not a quote. Go ahead.
He's never said anything about the Templars, and the link they have has nothing to do with Schuberg. It's just a list of. He's this neuroscientist that says he has studied the long historical allegations of child abuse and pedophile rings. These sorts of accusations may stretch back at least as far as the 14th century. According to him, but he's never said this. He's a neuropsychologist. So he has done research on like pedophile scares in the past, but they're all in Sweden. They all involve like peasants saying witches like stole their children and murdered them. And I looked at some of his research. Basically, he just looks at it like, this is what happened. This is like a potential political motivation for why they did it. These are the type of people that did the allegation. It's pretty unbiased, because I saw his name. I was like, oh, this must be some kind of false memory foundation syndrome, dude.
Yeah. And
he doesn't have a relation. The first thing I found on him is he had a published study. He looked at these 10 or 12 kids that were collectively raped like 102 times, and it was all filmed. And he was working with law enforcement. And he was interviewing them about what happened to them. And they had footage. They had footage of all this, so they knew what happened, and they were just going to compare what the kid's testimony was to what happened. Mm-hmm. And he found out that they distorted stuff. They didn't tell the truth. And some stuff was like nonsensical. That is kind of the opposite of the false memory foundation.
So
false memory syndrome. That like they're nonsensical because they're like kind of ashamed of saying what actually happened or don't understand it correctly.
Yeah.
And so like they're saying anything with any child sex abuse is going to be distorted.
Yeah.
So like what he does is the opposite of what I thought. And then you click on this link they have. Schuberg's not involved. It's just some website talking about child sex abuse, but like it's not even like dismissing it. It's just saying it's a problem. Here's some historical cases where it's been. So like what they're saying in that sentence is not borne out by what they linked or anything what they're referencing.
It's so weird. Okay, so I found the same thing going on with the articles that were written about the Shidon parchment a few years ago when it was finally announced to the public, and then a few years after that they've actually released a translation. And when you look at the articles, they all say, and these are all in like mainstream UK newspapers. I think one American newspaper wrote about it, USA Today. None of the others really did, but lots of like mainstream European and British newspapers wrote about this monumental event where this document about the Templars was revealed by the Vatican, having been discovered for the first time in 700 years, and they all reported that it absolved the Templars of all guilt, and everybody was wrong, and everyone was an asshole to accuse them of anything. And, when you actually then read what the Shidon parchment says, it doesn't say that. It says that the Pope absolved them of their sins after they confessed them. And so that's not the same.
Like pressured in, right? That was like what the Pope thought. Like they were like pressured into this position in the initiation.
It's a bit unclear what the Pope thought because what I find I just read what Barbara Frail, the woman who found it and then wrote about it and analyzed it. She's the source for all this stuff. She works for the Vatican. She's a Vatican spokeswoman, and she's the source of the distortion. But it's like you wouldn't get that from reading the newspapers, because you can tell the newspapers just took quotes from her press release, and then they tried to understand it with their own, probably really vague understanding of European history. And anyone who just has sort of the really simple Western Civ 101 will have heard about the Templars that as it's described as sort of satanic panic back then. Yes, there are people freaking out over nothing and accusing them of all sorts of things that must have been ridiculous. How could you possibly believe this? So that's what the average student of history believes. And then when they read this article that says that the Vatican has now found proof that the Pope absolved them because they weren't guilty. And that's what it said. And it basically, one of the articles even said, well, I guess the church owes them an apology. And it's that wasn't what she was saying, but she did put out certain phrases in her writings that indicated that. And then what you're talking about what the Pope thought about them and why he absolved them, she's the one who put in all of these motivations and read the emotions of people into the documents. It doesn't say that at all, So she came up with motivations for why the Templars were doing the ritual of stamping on the cross, and that they were practicing in case the Saracens captured them and forced them to do something like that. That they would know how to pretend like they hated Jesus when they really don't, so they could get through it without getting killed or something. And it's like, well, I thought the Templars were supposed to fight to the death. That's a bit odd. And so anyway, I just I didn't mean to step all over what you're saying. It's just like this is what happens when the MSM covers this subject or something similar to it. They will just say, oh, here's all these experts that say this is ridiculous. And then when you actually go and read the experts, like you're finding, that's not what they're saying, and there's a lot of context to what they're saying, and that's not reflected at all in the article, so it gives the reader a totally false impression. And at this point, I wonder if it's really gotten to a dangerous point with this child abuse stuff, because they're poo-pooing it so much that, it's going to be like the inverse of Boy Who Cried Wolf. I don't know what you would call it, but it's like there's going to be a point at which we're all becoming, what do you call it? Numb to the idea, and that when someone tells you that there's a child abuse ring or that someone's being abused at school or whatever, you're just not going to believe it because you're going to think, oh, that's horse shit. And especially if it involves any kind of politician or famous person. And even in this article, they said, what was it about Britain?
They were talking about they were talking about a single claim about a guy that was he claimed that there was this child sex abuse ring, and they investigated it, and there wasn't. And they're like, see, nothing to see here.
They didn't even name the guy.
No sex abuse in the. Let me see if I can find it real quick. The name of this article is VIP pedophile ring, accuser charged over child abuse images. Oh shit! What? The article they link says a man who made an accusation of a VIP pedophile ring. He himself was charged over abuse images.
Okay, I don't know why I can't find the section now, and you're not finding it either. But it was trying to glaze over the whole subject of pedophilia in the British government by saying that
I can read that.
Yeah, they don't.
Okay, here we go.
Yes,
it says accusations of pedophilia are often taken extremely seriously by law enforcement as well. In 2014, for instance, British police launched a multi-million-dollar investigation into a number of individuals, some of them national politicians, based on one man's accusations, which turned out to be utterly baseless. So that leaves you the impression that not only does law enforcement will always investigate this and get to the bottom of it, but that there isn't any pedophilia in the British government, which is false. That's crazy. That's public knowledge. Like there's so much to go over with that.
It's like only if you only read Vice or only watch their videos and you have BuzzFeed and nothing else, how could you not know? You'd have to be a non-consumer of news to not know that many people have stepped down from the British government in embarrassment. Many people have been charged with things. And then lots and lots of documents have mysteriously disappeared, and there's tons of evidence, even if no one will ever be charged, pointing at numerous very high up British politicians, and we know what hotels they went to and houses these parties were happening at. It wasn't just one guy. There's tons of survivors, young boys that were used as prostitutes that saw other kids being molested. And at one point, several of them I know mentioned seeing other kids get killed. And it's like there's no effing way you can just say, oh, all of that's silly, and that there was one guy whose accusations turned out to be baseless. That's not at all what's going on. And
they charged this guy with child porn.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Like, what? Like, did they plant that?
Well, that's what they everybody's afraid of. Everybody knows this. This is the weird thing. Like, okay, Vice will tell you that it's so absurd to even think these things happen that nobody but the crazy people believes it. But what is actually the case in my experience is that everybody knows that this happens in high level, what would you call it, the elite, in power circles. This is a big part of how they manage power over other people. Everybody knows this, and why I would say this is my experience trying to get some people to help me report what seemed to me to be obvious child trafficking on YouTube and Instagram. Nobody wanted to help me, and it's quite simply nobody wanted to be murdered. Nobody wanted their children to be murdered or kidnapped or raped. Nobody wanted to be set up with a child porn charge themselves. And that's one of the reasons why you're never going to get really what they're trying to do, right? What people are trying to do is have some kind of grassroots crowdsourced investigation into this matter. But the thing is, you can't find the evidence without becoming supposedly guilty yourself, because it's looking at it that is the crime. So if you discover the evidence, there's no way in which you can do that without bringing yourself into legal jeopardy.
Right.
And as well as, obviously, the very great likelihood that you will be murdered. And what this article is saying, the law enforcement takes it very seriously. Yeah, they take it seriously in that, like, they want to shut you up and get you out of their office as fast as possible. That was my experience. It's not that they don't believe you. It's just like, okay, don't come near me with that shit. Don't spread it on me, because it's toxic. It's just, I think that's the whole point. It's like, or that's part of it. I don't know. There's more to it. There's some religious thing about it. But in all practicality, it's like bringing this piece of, radioactive material into the room, and like everybody just has to back away. And you get the idea. Like, this stuff does go on. Nobody can do anything about it. Nobody will do anything about it. The closest anyone's going to come to dealing with it at all is an article like this to let you know that you're going to be treated like an idiot for even noticing or talking about it. So thank you for showing me that article. It pissed me off just as much as you thought it would. And of course, I'm curious about who you are. I mean, I don't want to expose too much, but I mean, why is there another person in the universe looking at this? I don't meet these people, so where did you come from?
Well, I guess so. I mean, I've been kind of like looking at the stuff my whole life without really realizing it. Like as a kid, I was really into like the Forteana books, like Mothman and like UFOs and all that stuff. And like I'd read weird things, like this one alien abduction encounter. Like someone saw a badge on this great alien that was a flying serpent. And I was like, what? They wouldn't have flying serpents on other planets. Or like an alien insignia that's a palm tree and a crescent moon. I'm like, what? Why would other planets have moon? And like, it didn't make. I was like, what is going on? That was like me whenever I was 10. So like I looked in, I looked into all kinds of like religions and mysticism and all kinds of stuff. So I was always sort of investigating. It was just kind of something I did as a hobby. But I wasn't like reading books or really diving deep until the WikiLeaks 2 years ago. And around that time, I was like, I feel like something's going on that I'm not privy to, and I know I don't know it. Just seeing like how people in power talked with one another and how they excluded things. And then you just had like weird things in those WikiLeaks emails, like talking about sacrificing chickens to Moloch and all that stuff. And I was like, well, that's strange. And then like you start getting pictures out of it, like the John Podesta with the 14 and the fish on his hands, and it's like, well, I know what that's referring to, but like, what is he doing? And it just kind of at some point it clicked. I'm like, oh, like these, like all the satanic panic stuff, all that stuff is like I'm looking at that peeking out at me right now.
Did you hear what the official explanation is for that, by the way?
No, I don't. I'm not sure.
I got
for the fish in the 14? Yeah, there's like a list of like laws or something, and like 14's like wildlife conservation or something. Yeah. It's like save the fishes.
Yeah, it's like the UN's list of things that they want to do about the environment or something. And yeah, so I know about this only because I had a video about that, and then some total like Hillary shillbots. This is during the election time, right? So like all of a sudden this one video of mine gets a ton of hits, and it's all just because these shills keep coming to make comments, and they want to let me know that you're barking up the wrong tree here, because look, here's another video of someone else doing the 14 thing. And I'm just wondering, how long has that video been there, and what it seemed to me like a non-explanation, but I'll just put that in there because I know that people will probably look this up and they'll find the debunking answer of what that supposedly means. And I'm not totally satisfied with it. I don't really think that that's why John Podesta did that.
Like he has valuable time, and why would you even pose for that photograph? It's like, oh, you and I, we know about fishes, right? It's like, okay.
Well, and did he illustrate any of the other rules on the list? Right.
No, he didn't have like 1 through 13. He just had and then like I followed like the Jimmy Savile thing and the like Epstein thing when that was going on. And I was like, well, this is a problem. Like, and back then there wasn't like, oh, this stuff is made up. It was just like, hey, everyone, bad things are happening around the world. And then
it was like when Jimmy Savile came out. I remember it was like the British newspapers were saying, oh, so he's part of that whole thing too. And then they would reprise all of the articles they'd done in recent years about that subject of the pedophile rings in London and in the power structure. And they said, okay, well, these stories about Jimmy Savile fit in with what we already know about the royal family and the people around them. So,
right, and then you have like one of the princes with Epstein on his island. Like, it was all connected, and it was like, there's a big international thing going on. And like, even the news media was like, pretty much.
Yep.
That's the case. And then once it was about the election, it was just like, I have a really good graphic that's, it's Google, was it Trends? It's zoomed in on like 3 days. October 21st, I think it says. There's a line that says, spirit cooking, it goes up, peaks, goes down. Right when it goes down, fake news instantly goes up. And then one day after, that's when Pizzagate spikes.
Wow. Yeah, this has been a really wild time just because of this subject in particular. I mean, it's really, really interesting how all these things came to fruition or came to the forefront of the public consciousness now, just because I guess Donald Trump challenged the establishment apparently in some way. Maybe, unless it's a fake out. I don't know. But for one reason or another, this is being shoved in our faces now. And I remember, Alex, when the Pizzagate subject came up, like I was not watching the news because I was writing something, and I was not answering emails, and I was in my zone, and Alex kept bugging me like, hey, you really ought to watch the news now. This is right up your alley. You really need to know what they're saying. And so I finally looked, and I'm like, oh, shit. This is everything. And then you said, isn't it weird that our Baphomet books just came out showing this lurid history of the Templars, and then everything that Hammer Purgstall was saying the Templars were doing, or even things that he didn't say, but when you look at the pictures, they're obvious. It's all of this is what the politicians are being accused of now in WikiLeaks, and this is the story of the hour, is stuff that's almost the same, you know. So I'm not saying there's a connection here, but it does seem like we're in a zeitgeist in which people want to become enlightened about this particular tradition, and if nothing else, they want to know how it's used against them in the power structure. They're waking up to the blackmail aspect of it, and I think that's awesome. But I don't know if it's really going to result in anything here. But it's definitely, it's like someone's doing this on purpose, and I don't know who it is. I don't know if it's a psyop. The whole thing's a big psyop, a big limited hangout thing, or
right to like quell the discontent about it, like make you less enraged. Like I saw a comment the other day, someone like posted the Gilles de Rais thing, and they're like, I don't even feel angry or excited when I read stuff like this. I just feel like a quiet hatred.
Yeah. Well, yes, okay. You know, we hear all this stuff. We hear about Me Too. We hear about everybody's raping everybody, and everybody's molesting everybody and blackmailing everybody about it. And so it's like, okay, well, I guess everybody does that. And it's just like how nobody cares now about the president having an affair and lying about it, because been there, done that. And that's the way we're going to all feel now about pedophilia in high places, whether we believe in it or not. We're going to be so bored with the subject that we won't even have a reaction. So I'm sorry, we are talking about this boring subject that everybody's already had too much of. Anyway, I still find it fascinating. Thank you very much for your contributions here. I guess this is one of the questions I wanted to ask. Like, is this the first time you've ever done anything like this?
As far as like translating a document?
Yeah.
I think I've translated other things. I just know I've had like 5 years of Latin, so I'll sometimes just translate old stuff.
But yeah,
so
have you ever tried to find out the real original history of some historical mystery?
In some capacity, yeah, but not like so singularly focused.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one of the reasons why I got your book in the first place. When did I read that? I read that like June 2017? Not June. January, I think. 2017. Just like because I know why. I first got involved with you because someone somewhere on the internet just posted a picture of the Baphomet reliefs, just like the wiggly statues, and I was like, that with no comment.
Yeah.
And I was like, that looks strange. That looks like something I'm not supposed to see. So I saved it, and like I tried doing like a Google reverse image search on it, and nothing came up. And so I was like kind of like asking around different places. I'm like, does anyone know what this is? And eventually, someone's like, it's from Mysterium Baphometus Revelatum. I was like, okay, so I was looking into it, and then like you popped up, and I had actually read an article or two from you before, but not. And then I was like, oh, well, you've got this translation coming out, so I bought your book, and I read it. I'm like, well, when is that translation coming out? And it was still, I was like, well, maybe I can just like translate it before it comes out. And I didn't, but I like read over it in Latin. That was interesting that I just like randomly came across an image of it.
Well, since you've had 5 years of Latin, if you ever feel the urge and get around to it, not that you would, but it'd be cool for someone who, another mind, especially now that you've immersed yourself in this stuff, to go over the Latin copy and see if there's anything we may have gotten wrong. I'm sure I got tons wrong, So
I can skim over it. Because I've like read through the whole document in Latin. I just didn't translate it, so I'm kind of familiar with it.
So you can just like crack open a Latin book and read it.
It's like half. Like I just like it's just like looking at the words. Basically, I can't like figure the grammar out just looking at it, but I just like know the what do you call it? The vocabulary. So.
Yeah. 2 more personal questions. Okay, so you sound like a young man, relatively, of primarily European descent. Am I wrong?
No, that's right.
What age group are you in? You don't have to give us specifics, but...
I think I'm mid-millennial.
Okay. Interesting. And have you experienced... You said you've been doing this since February. Since you started seriously trying to work on this document, has it affected your life in any way?
Not really. I would say I had much weirder experiences before I was engaged with it.
Okay.
Like months ago. Like before, it was kind of like around the election, things were very strange, and like I'd wake up in the middle of the night and like things would shake, and I was like, "What is going on?" Wake up like repeating like things like statements out of my mouth, like just strange things. But like since then, it's gone off because I remember you talking about in your YouTube video about like the fog and translating it, being felt under some sort of spiritual pressure, working on the transcript for Mysterium Baphometus Revelatum, but I haven't had any difficulties like that. In fact, the past few days I've been very spry. So.
Good. Yeah, I had a bunch of negative things, and it seems to kind of have a bad weight to it, the whole subject. So yeah, there are a lot of things in my life that I wonder if they somehow came from the bad luck that seems to come to people who study Baphomet. And I'm basing this on several, not just my own experiences, but the experience of several other people that contributed to the history of Baphomet. So there's Eliphas Levi himself, and then Michelet, Jules Michelet, the French historian, also just said, the whole time I was working on the trials of the Templars, that was the worst time of my life. I was so depressed. Everything kept going wrong. So I was just saying if any of that had affected you. But if not, that's good. Maybe the curse of Baphomet has been broken. And that's awesome. All right, man. Well, thank you so much for spending the afternoon with us. I really appreciate it. And the work that you've done is huge. So let's talk again sometime. Thanks a lot.
All right. Anytime.